A little over a year ago, Potter Payper dropped his long-awaited debut album, Real Back in Style. And after taking 2 days and 6 full hours to react to it, we have one question. Is Real still back in style? Let's break it down.
KRXOVR Media.
Coming into this, I was hoping and expecting he brought some of the elements from Thanks for Waiting that I liked, but also still keeping some of those real rappy, in-depth, personal, authentic, vivid narratives that he also had in Training Day. But I do also think that the way that some people kind of amping it up in the comments and on Twitter, the project didn't fully live up to what I thought I was going to get based on some of the things that people were saying.
It's funny you say that though, because I didn't come in with the expectations of this being as good of a project as it was for me. In the Training Days, we got a glimpse of his lyrical ability from start to finish.
Yeah.
But the things that he rapped were just so impressive that I can understand why people were so attached to those Training Days experiences. And then with Thanks for Waiting, that's his progression toward making music. You're starting to hear him actually have catchy hooks. We're starting to see him collaborate with artists that can bring us a different sound, like Huncho, for example.
Yeah.
But the thing was, it felt so jarring for me at times that it almost felt like the hooks were forced in certain tracks.
Yeah, I could see.
Johnny on the Spot was my favorite one because it sounded like a rap track that just happened to have a hook. But it was still clean enough that I could just play it, not have to be so worried about what he's saying too much, and just enjoy the sonical experience. Real Back in Style kind of showed his growth. Where he's able to grab those elements from his initial start to his career, stepping into Thanks for Waiting where he's making more music and not just rapping at you for 24 songs, and still giving us an experience that is still authentic to him.
My initial thoughts was just that this is really good, but the way that the project was constructed and the way that the tracks were arranged, it did the project an injustice, and it didn't really fully lean into some of the things that we got, especially earlier on within those first couple tracks. He gave us something that we got nowhere else in the whole project, and at that point, to me, is when it kind of started to break down just a bit. When you show me what you could do and you don't lean into it, I'm gonna call it out if I don't get that all the way through from top to bottom in the track list.
You need guns when you're mixed up in beef like mine. It's hard not to smile when you got some teeth like mine.
So I really do think that Real Back in Style missed an opportunity to actually address why the album was called Real Back in Style. In my opinion, it actually makes a stronger outro song, just because I think it helps wrap together all of the things that he talked about in the whole album. Quite Befitting actually has a way more cinematic sound that does the album more justice as an intro.
What's embroidered in the fabric and it's quite befitting.
I saw it as a progression from him talking about where he began to him now celebrating where he's reached in his career. Quite Befitting just wasn't one of the tracks that I felt like really started that story for me.
That's fair. I guess you were hearing the lyrics and I was mostly listening to the sonics of it. Just like the way that it opened up to me just gave me intro vibes. It is one of, if not the only song that I can't hear or feel like it builds off of something else.
If my dad never walked in the African sun.
Hearing the way that All My Life transitioned into £1 Million, it made me feel like, okay, so he's threading titles, he's doing transitions in between songs, and it's like, what's the point of doing it if you're not really gonna lean into it and do it again?
I mean, funny enough that you say that too though, because I also kind of feel like this was an unnecessary transition to £1 Million.
If I had £1 million.
The hook is about, if I had £1 million, I do this, I do that.
Oh, but nothing
and then you
else.
get into the verses, it's just like,
yeah.
What does this have to do with your grandma?
Yeah, no, I get it.
It could have segued into something a bit more intentional if he really took that route.
10 years I've been rapping, 6 hours in the can, the whole 10 I stayed trapped in.
Multifaceted is one of those songs that when I listen to it, I don't understand what the song is about.
It felt like there was a narrative building up at some point in the beginning, and then we got here and it was just completely gone.
It's so good that it's jarring because it stands out in a really awkward way. Just rearranging it, as we keep saying, would have really helped alleviate what you're pointing out in terms of how awkwardly it sounds in the track list.
Coming from that confusion going into what they ain't, I started to get even more confused.
I know she looking down proud, God bless me, I got rich off pain.
It's just a boasty song and it just feels good. And then with the rest of the context of the information that we received in the beginning, it's like, where are we going here? Even when you try to piece together a narrative, which I think I was pretty much able to do with my reordering, it still kind of just felt like it was just there. I don't think it's in my top 3 personally, but it was a standout moment for me. I just don't know how it fits here.
There ain't nothing like this freedom, how can I explain?
How Can I Explain is in a similar place when I listen to it. It's like, why is this even here? And it could have been a little bit shorter as well to be just that brief little interlude while also not doing the album a disservice.
I still enjoy it as a standalone piece. I just don't get it when it's in the mix of just everything else. So what are you telling me here? And I think that's going to be the ongoing theme for a lot of the touch points for these tracks. Context is what was missing for a lot
of them.
I'd have quid on the brick and just blame Brexit.
I found a way to piece Blame Brexit into more of the narrative of what the story could have been. It just felt kind of horror theme, but a little bit like, okay, we're getting a little bit of his lyricism here, but then we're also kind of losing some of the energy. But every time I listen to the project now, I have to hear Blame Brexit.
Potter had a chance to make the message of this album, life is so real that it's a horror movie.
When you look at Toy Story 2, it does bring us back to that side of the story.
Got my gun in my pocket, not my hip.
However, I do feel like that's one of the most skippable moments on this project for me.
Like, that's probably one of the main reasons why Toy Story 2 is in my bottom 3. Again, just positioning it a little bit better. It makes me be more willing to play it top to bottom because now I'm hearing it for a reason. And it not being there for a reason is what makes it skippable.
My life's a horror movie, I'm the protagonist.
Scenes was one of those glue pieces as well. It kind of brought us where we needed to go. And this is also why it's in the top 3 for me. It's one of those breaths of fresh air that meant something.
And that's why I think Scenes had the opportunity to really thread this whole thing together.
I was a corner boy, meeting cats by the corner shop.
Corner Boy to me, as well as Multifaceted, is like the sonic musical encapsulation of Real Back in Style, and that's why it's in my top 3. It's one of those moments where I think he was able to combine the rapidy rap aspects that we talk about that make him so loved by his fans with the elements of Gangsteritis, for example, in terms of a really singable, replayable hook that doesn't sacrifice its integrity as a hip-hop song, but still making it something that I can listen to even if I don't relate to that experience. The studio version of this song is where it gets confusing again, because this is the first and only time we get a skit like that in the album that feels like a moment out of a movie, and it's jarring, and it really segues right into what I consider my bottom 3 in this whole album.
Track flow Kane, what I need is a mic and some cling.
Track Flow Kane isn't a bad song, but it adds absolutely nothing to what he's saying. Could have been a calm minute and a half, and then wipe your hands with it, move on.
The shit that's got me thinking, am I making money or just victims?
Money of Victims is one of those songs where it is so dark, but I think the aspects of it that I thought would turn me off from listening to it, it actually adds a lot of value to the album too. It still falls in my bottom 3 because I wouldn't listen to it as a standalone as much as I would even the songs that I don't necessarily rate, even as highly as Money of Victims itself.
It was still just a step above a track like Actuality.
Love me like my nan, love me like my fan.
This was the one that made me feel the least. It was just there. And I think there were better attempts at that kind of sound on this project anyway.
It was holding us back from the big conclusion.
White ash on my hotel floor room.
White Ash is that moment we can find us take a big exhale, and it's like, because you have so many tense moments, you need something to ease you out of it. Everything about it just feels so satisfying.
It's in my top 3 because it felt like it was bringing the pieces together in a way that some of the tracks attempted to and just didn't do so well. If we got a bit more of that earlier on, we probably wouldn't have felt like we were on this confusing roller coaster of themes in the project. So when I reordered these tracks, I was able to find a spot that was a bit more appropriate for White Ash in my opinion. I placed it directly after Corner Boy because Corner Boy was touching on his experiences being out there on road, whether it was the good part or the bad part, but White Ash felt like he was reflecting on everything that had happened prior to that. And I also used that track as a good segue to get into the darker side of those experiences, with going straight into Toy Story 2 being the next bit that just brings us to that, whoa, how is he dealing with these things? And going into the rest of the story was really just touching on that being the consistent experience for a while, until the point where it started to become like a horror movie. But then him finally getting into that victory lap, those tracks where he gets to really just boast about his greatness. So I really just looked at it as, this is his growth as a person. This is where he was born, where he came from. This is what he tried to do to become successful. This is what he experienced when he was trying to be successful. And this is where he's at now.
And the missed opportunity here is to rearrange these songs so that every single one of them exists within the context, which is that his life is a horror movie. And I would have started that out by redesigning the artwork to make this exact same visual be placed right outside of a movie theater. Now you're seeing the fact that, okay, this whole thing is going to be leaning into this movie theme. And even just when you look at the track listing, you see something like Toy Story 2 before even hearing the album. And then once you hear Multifaceted,
Your life's a movie, but nobody ever saw a sequel.
not too far after a song where the visuals are about movies, it references movies, it's called Scenes. He had a chance to even retitle all of these songs Scene 1, Scene 2, leading up to Scenes itself. By the time we hear everything that we hear, it makes sense while we're now finally hearing him constantly say Real Back in Style. And then again, just having that super cinematic outro right there with White Ash, and then it's that closing moment where all this ties together. With all that being said, make sure you check out our album reaction.
La música de Harry I have not heard that.
I heard that song in a
so
minute.
long,
I heard
bro.
that song in a minute. And the video where I compare Real Back in Style to Thanks for Waiting and decide which project is better.